Welcome everybody to the Circular Procurement for Local Government webinar. I'd like to start off with an acknowledgement to country. We acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the traditional owners and custodians of the lands that we all meet on today. We recognise their continuing connection and unique relationship to lands, waters and communities that is central to their identity and culture. We acknowledge the strength, the innate wisdom and knowledge that traditional owners hold. And we acknowledge that there is so much for us all to learn through the practice of listening, especially as public sector and sustainability professionals. We pay our deepest respects to all First Nation cultures and the elders past, present and emerging, whose sovereignty has not yet been ceded. I would also like to mihi to the Indigenous peoples of New Zealand, Maori, with over 100 iwis, each with their own localised wisdom and practices as stewards of the land. And we all remain committed to doing what we can individually and collectively to create justice, equal rights and rightful recognition for all. So yes, welcome to everybody across Australia. This webinar is national and I know that we have a lot of people joining us from New Zealand as well. My name is Nicole Thompson. I'm a principal consultant at Edge Impact. Edge, for those who don't know, is a global sustainability consultancy. We're a B Corp. We're one of the second businesses to have our science-based targets approved in Australia. We really like to walk the talk. We are all about impact and we do that through science, strategy and storytelling, which is exactly what we're doing today with Circular Procurement. We're hearing the stories from our amazing panelists and presenters today who all have such rich experience across the board in terms of circularity and implementing circular economy into procurement. So I would like to introduce you to everyone today. We have with us from Edge Impact, we have Hannah Elias, who is a senior consultant. She is in our circular economy and life cycle thinking team. She's an experienced consultant in material optimization throughout the value chain, strategy development, circular economy, advisory, and behavior change initiatives is what she works on at Edge. And she works across organisations, including with local government. We also have Sebastian Salcedo. He's a senior consultant in our sustainable and ethical procurement team. He works in supply chain and logistics management and helps organisations develop and achieve their sustainability objectives by focusing on sustainable procurement. We also have Justin Bonzi, a principal consultant at Edge, also in the circular economy team. He has over 10 years experience in sustainability, working extensively in local government with a focus on cost-efficient material optimization, decarbonisation, and behaviour change. And fun fact that I found out today, reading his bio, he also founded the initiatives Responsible Cafes and Responsible Runners. We also have today 4 panelists from across Australia. We've got representation from New Zealand, New South Wales, Victoria, and South Australia. So ladies first, I'd like to introduce Caitlin Smith. Caitlin is from Green Industry South Australia, or you may hear us refer to them as GISA, and she's a project officer with policy. She's worked across state government agencies and the not-for-profit sector, being involved in a range of collaborative circular and sustainable procurement projects. And she also led the development of GISA's Circular Procurement Knowledge Hub, a knowledge and information sharing platform on circular procurement that we'll hear more about today. I'd like to introduce Alejandra Torres. She is Sustainability Engagement Officer at Waverley Council in New South Wales, an experienced program manager and sustainability engagement professional with over 13 years experience delivering collaborative behaviour change and change management programs across local government, businesses and the not-for-profit sector in Australia and the South Pacific. We have Dr. Scott Bryant, Circular Economy Coordinator at the City of Greater Bendigo in Victoria. He has a background in mechanical and sustainability engineering, energy policy and circular economy. And Scott is currently working to develop a circular and renewable economy and society in the region. And he's dealing with the elephant in the room that is a closing regional landfill. Previously, he was the circular economy lead for energy infrastructure at Zero Waste in Scotland. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Philip Roetman. He is a coordinator of environmental sustainability at the City of Burnside in South Australia. And he develops and implements initiatives to improve environmental sustainability of the organisation and the community in line with Council's strategic plans. He's also an adjunct research fellow at University of South Australia, where he's conducted research about sustainability, citizen science, education, policy development, and behaviour change. As you can see, an incredible panel, and really looking forward to their storytelling today. The format for the webinar today, we are going to begin with a presentation on circular procurement from the EDGE team. We will be using Slido, so if you haven't already, please scan the QR code and join Slido there with the code, as we'll be asking a few interactive questions as we go. I will be facilitating some questions with the panel, and we'll have time at the end to go to the audience for your questions. So please, as we go throughout the next hour or so, add in your questions to the chat function in Zoom meeting, which should be down the bottom. A little tab should pop up. Pop your questions in the chat. I do expect we'll have quite a few, so we'll do our best to get through them all. But if there are any questions that we don't get to, we will follow up with a response post-webinar. A reminder that this webinar is also being recorded, and we will share a recording of the webinar following the presentation as well. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Justin, who will kick off our presentation.
Hello, everyone. Firstly, welcome to the webinar. The fantastic turnout today is really testament to the growing awareness of strategic purchasing power and really the growing interest in and expectations for improved environmental and social outcomes through increased material efficiency and, of course, the associated carbon reduction. So before we jump into the presentation, I'd first like to frame today's discussion by putting circular procurement in context. So quite simply, circular procurement, as many of you here will know, as one of the most effective ways to drive outcomes operationally and throughout your supply chain is, quite frankly, sexy. Which means do a little dance, because if you're here, you are sexy. Procurement professionals grounded in sustainability and sustainability professionals grounded in procurement are hot commodities. And we're seeing increasing overlap between the two, given its potential as a direct and measurable mechanism for progressing towards targets and Council's increasing role in the supply chain. In fact, alongside actual service provision and infrastructure, procurement is perhaps the most powerful tool that councils have, especially when supported by the executive and elected council. Executive voices, as we know, are extremely powerful. Procurement guidelines embedded within the organization, coordination and communication between departments, including how to translate that value proposition for a range of internal stakeholders, awareness of broader market opportunities to inform proactive approaches to value chains, collaboration between councils, either directly or through regional organizations or local government associations, and of course, the importance of motivated and vocal champions within council cannot be understated. One of the critical elements of circular procurement is to consider the net value of materials, products, and services based throughout the value chain, not just the initial cost, to ensure the full value is being captured, especially when innovating in new areas that don't yet have an economy of scale. This might mean planning for a higher upfront cost for a greater long-term benefit. Failing to consider and quantify this entrenches a short-term vision and can miss out on reporting the true benefits achieved. A good example of this, and for many of you who know me, you know I would not miss an opportunity to mention this, is crumb rubber asphalt, where waste-derived crumb rubber is mixed into asphalt binder. So this costs a bit more upfront as demand continues to build, but data shows it can extend road life by an astonishing 50%. It would be a shame to miss an opportunity to leverage recycled content to dramatically reduce embodied emissions with a net cost savings over the life of council's largest asset in roads, while at the same time supporting product stewardship, just because it initially costs more than business as usual. So I'd now like to do a quick high-level overview of procurement in major national, state, and territory policies and strategies. So as you see here, federally, procurement figures prominently in the National Waste Policy. Next slide, there we go. In the National Waste Policy Action Plan 2019, and of course, the Annex year in 2022. As well as in all major state and territory waste and resource recovery policies and strategies. Next, please. Okay, here we go. So as you can see the list here, it's pretty significant. So federally, we see that it is mentioned as a sustainable procurement is mentioned as a strategic objective and tool, of course, and the federal government is looking at adopting policies, targets, guidance, and metrics for sustainable procurement to increase recycled content. And of course, they've released a sustainable procurement guide. Whereas on the state and territory side, it's very clear that it's across the board that it's a tool to reduce waste, drive end markets through recycled content, drive innovation, and increase knowledge sharing, as we'll learn from South Australia today. So government purchasing targets, for example, that's a really, really powerful way to establish markets. Some governments are pursuing a recycled content on an if not, why not basis, right? So basically it's assuming that we're going to be including recycled content metrics and requirements within procurement. And if not, why not? And there's even discussion of a coming mandate to consider recycled content in all government procurement, which is very, very exciting. Some have guidelines or frameworks that many of you may already use or be aware of. Most mentions of procurement at the moment are based on sustainable, green, or social procurement, but not circular per se. But we'll get into the details of that shortly. But as you can see on the right, there's a long list of major policies and strategies across all states and territories that mention procurement. Next slide, please. So the role of procurement, as you can see here, is nuanced a bit differently in each state and territory. But as you can see, it plays a major role in driving demand for recovered materials through whole of life value chains, supporting regenerative systems and a more robust built environment, addressing problematic material streams, and supporting downstream reprocessing and remanufacturing. Remembering, of course, that for every 10,000 tons of recycled material that we use, we're also supporting over 9 jobs in the sector. So the last thing I'll leave you with is, before turning it over to my colleague, is that all major initiatives often begin with one person and end with the entire organization. So we need champions like everyone here to drive change. Very, very critical. So with my bit wrapped up, I'll now hand over to my colleague, Edge Senior Consultant, Hannah Elias.
Thanks, Justin. I'll speak to what circular procurement is and focus mostly on the sort of goals and the benefits. But before diving into that, I guess keen to just sort of align on an understanding that when we talk about circular procurement, we're talking about considering and applying the circular economy principles in the sourcing of products and services across their whole life cycle. So in practice, this means procuring products and services in a way that designs out waste and pollution, that keeps products and materials in use, and that regenerates our natural systems. So looking at the goals of circular procurement, and as I'm talking to these, I guess keen for you to keep in mind the sort of our strategies or that sort of hierarchy that in the circular economy space in particular, we really look to prioritize sort of refusing resources in the first instance, and then moving down that ladder, looking at the role that recycling and recovery can play. So in terms of these goals, we're really looking at how we procure goods and services, how it can help to sort of achieve those outcomes. So the first goal I'd like to speak to is around avoidance. So looking to include more efficient use of materials, looking at internal sharing and repair or refurbishment. The next is around designing for end of life, so using materials that can be easily separated and disassembled to improve collection and recovery outcomes. Next, around substitution, so looking at replacing virgin material, increasing percentage of recycled content in products, or designing in lower impact materials. And this in particular is an area that we're really seeing local governments leading the way, especially as Justin mentioned earlier, in using sort of crumb rubber in roads and a range of different materials. Also looking at value adding as one of the key goals of circular procurement. So looking at improving the preparation, presentation, or quality of recyclables, and or reducing the contamination to suit market needs for input materials. So in particularly, how we procure services can play a role in this, especially around waste service providers, can really help with that value adding piece of materials. Efficiency through reuse and leasing models is also a really interesting space around circular procurement. So an opportunity here to engage organisations or individuals that enable reuse or sale of used goods, so things like charity shops and tool libraries. And this can include contractual arrangements for take back and reuse, or looking at renting models. Next, looking at influencing upstream outcomes. This is one of the areas of circular procurement that is especially interesting to me. So looking at embedding circular economy principles in procurement helps to sort of increase demand, and as a result, supply and infrastructure of circular products. This is an area that Scott from City of Greater Bendigo, I think we'll sort of speak to later. They've done some really interesting work in this space. So it will be great to hear a bit more on that and how it's really key in sort of stimulating those circular outcomes. And finally, looking at supplier engagement and transparency. So circular planning, sourcing, and managing procurement processes should really enable greater engagement and transparency of products. So looking now at the sort of benefits of circular procurement, and the benefits I'll speak to sort of span across the environmental, social and governments, and on their own are quite significant, but can also, like framed in this context of the role that they play, can really keen to highlight how they can help to meet sustainability targets. So on the environmental lens, we've got landfill diversion. So for example, looking at recycling can really help with meeting landfill diversion targets, resource efficiency, especially the role that reuse can play there, and embodied carbon and scope 3 emissions. This in particular is an area where procurement is just such a powerful tool that can be leveraged. On the social front, circular procurement can really support local business and job creation, which we all know is a really important aspect for local governments, and also can support with responsible supply chain partnerships. And then on the governance front, public perception and reputational risk reduction is really something that circular procurement can help to address, especially in terms of how councils look to sort of like manage assets and looking to apply those goals of circular procurement that we've touched on, can really help with achieving those benefits. And also looking at generating life cycle cost and resource savings. The inclusion of life cycle is key there, because we know that sometimes when we're looking at procuring, especially goods, that there is a trade-off between those upfront costs. But if we're considering it over the sort of life cycle, there's some really great case studies and examples of how circular procurement can actually lead to improved cost and resource savings over a product's life cycle. And supply chain resilience, and also sitting across all of those is supply chain transparency. So really investing the time and resources in that circular procurement can really help to unlock those benefits. So to touch on now a little bit more of a deeper dive on circular procurement in action for local governments. So in a second, you'll see it on the Slido. We'll share the link again, but we're keen to ask from you sort of what are some of the barriers and challenges that you're seeing in circular procurement. So as I'm speaking through these, keen for you to sort of keep in mind what's resonating, or is there anything else that comes to mind that you're seeing? But something that we've observed from working with a range of different local governments and local government aligned organisations is that one of the key challenges is around a lack of resources, whether that's staff or having sort of effective tools to implement circular procurement programs. I'm sure it's not something that you need to be told and something that you're well aware of, but just that, yeah, the resources can really present a big challenge there. The second is around product performance. In some cases, this might be sort of like a real concern, but it's also interesting that there is sort of this perception around circular products that they don't perform at the same level as their sort of counterparts. And then we also see that oftentimes there's sort of a lack of tools to measure asset or product performance over its lifespan, or perhaps sort of a lack of data over sort of a long-term period to sort of debunk some of the perception there around product performance. Next, around product availability. So in some cases, more circular or sustainable alternatives might not be widely available in the regional market. And again, understanding that that sort of like local procurement is important to a lot of local governments that can present, a real challenge. Price, another obvious but important thing to note, that sustainable or circular products may have a higher acquisition cost than existing virgin alternatives, as mentioned earlier. And culture can be another really big challenge. So that internal pushback on circular procurement practices can really be seen to sort of disrupt the business as usual. And I mean, something I know we hear a lot is just that sort of like, I've always done it this way, so why would I do it any different? And also knowledge. So implementing circular procurement processes requires sort of knowledge and confidence in circular procurement, and including an understanding of what circular products and services are available. So sort of considering that knowledge that's required within the context of some of those other challenges can, really create a bit of pushback in terms of implementing circular procurement. So we'll put, great, good to see the Slidos already. Lots of entries in there. So lack of budget is a really big one. Lack of resources, legislation is an important thing to call out. Management and council support. So it's interesting, Seb will touch on this shortly, but interesting to see the differences in approaches of how local governments are really looking to embed circular procurement, and differences in approaches from sort of a bottom-up versus a top-down kind of approach, and availability of sustainable solutions. I know that's a big challenge for some of the councils that we work with, is sort of where do you begin? And might leave it there and hand over to Sebastian to provide a bit more of a sort of detailed understanding.
Thank you, Hannah. Well, you might be saying right now, that all sounds fantastic, but where can I start? And I think there's a couple of levers that a local government can start using to start embedding circular procurement in their day-to-day procurement plan. And procurement performance. The first one is they need to establish the foundations. Every council already have most of these things in place. They have policies, guidelines, frameworks, and sustainability strategies, but they need to start embedding them into procurement so everyone is clear on what to achieve and how to align those to a common goal. Then, I think the next one is in the planning phase, councils can start embedding circularity concepts into the existing systems and processes. They can start prioritizing spend categories and opportunities, so understanding where they have the highest spend and the biggest opportunities. They can start training their staff to address some of those barriers that we mentioned previously and increase capacity building. They can, in the source part, they can start putting product specifications, circularity specifications in the products. They can put minimum standards and requirements. Then can join with other councils to do joint tendering. This might be harder to achieve, but it gets more leverage and more negotiation power. They can start addressing contractors early because they know more than you do about their sustainability and their circular offerings. So if you engage them before you go to tenders, like, look, what options do you have? You can start leveraging their knowledge to start implementing it in your procurement. And the other one, that's one that we've been seeing a lot with a lot of our clients, is creating multi-criteria decision-making tools that will help the person doing the day-to-day procurement. And then one of the most important things is that they need to start measuring and monitor the product performance. So if one of the biggest barriers, as you mentioned, is they don't have the same performance. Well, it's very hard if you don't do trials and you start managing and measuring to see actually there's performance or if there's no performance there. So every council is going to do all of these if they want to start getting their sustainable procurement and their circular procurement things in place. They're going to write a policy. They're going to start setting targets. They're going to align their processes to those targets. They're going to create tools, and they're going to have to communicate internally with internal stakeholders, doing some behavioral change management, and externally to signal their intentions to the overall market. But the way of how you do it, or the order of how you do it, is the important things. Like, you, depending on each council, you might start from different areas. So some councils are starting from the policy approach. So they're starting to write the policies, and those policies are going to start guiding. So it's a top-down approach. We have our policies, and then you start setting the targets, and then you align the process. That is very convenient because it's very linear. But some councils might say, well, we don't have all the buy-in, or we don't have the time to start writing policies. Some other councils are taking a more tools approach, like they're starting to create the multi-criteria decision analysis tools. They're starting to create knowledge or sending their people, their team members, to webinars to start creating this knowledge and starting from the tools. And then those tools are going to start implementing and changing policy. And the other one is some councils or regions are creating a comprehensive approach, which is doing everything at the same time. This is a great approach because you start leveraging things that you're doing in the policy with the tools. The only drawback of this is that you require more resources and more time, and you need more buy-in from everyone in the council or in the organization. So how do we get started as a council? How do we start? Well, first of all, the perfect timing is now. You have to start. If you start thinking, you might end up with paralysis by analysis. So start small, but start growing maturity. So don't go for the big piece of the pie. You can start small and start having those small wins. Focus on relationships, refine systems and some processes to learn. Remember that your suppliers are the people that know more about the products than you do. So embrace those relationships, engage them, and start learning with them. Do pilots. If you start with pilots, you can start seeing if the products are as good as they say they are, but you have to evaluate and you have to measure, because if you do a pilot without measuring, it's not going to be, you're not going to be able to scale it throughout the organization. Harness the power of procurement. This is something that we've been discussing and that Hannah mentioned a lot. It's about the life cycle costs or the whole life cycle value of the product, not only the initial cost, because that would be that gives you a bigger area to manage. Engage suppliers. I already mentioned. You don't have to invent the wheel. There's a lot of people, our panelists included, that are already doing this. So leverage from their learnings and their mistakes. and consider partnering and cost sharing models with other organizations so you can overcome the cost burden. Okay, so I am going to talk very quickly before I leave it to our panelists, which are the main stars of this webinar, about two projects that we've worked in at H Impact in circular economy. The first one is the Hunter Joint Organization Circular Economy Procurement Program. So this is in line with their circular economy roadmap, and they wanted to understand and coordinate they wanted to provide a common framework for all the regional circular procurement. They wanted to provide decisions and support tools for their councils to start fostering a circular economy market, and they wanted to share and promote the journey. So they engaged us and decided, like, how are we going to do it? And this is how they did it. They drafted a multi-year implementation plan. This multi-year implementation plan found the existing perceptions of barriers and challenges and started addressing those. They prioritized spend categories. As we mentioned, that's something that we have to do. We cannot address everything at the same time. So they started like selecting which areas they were going to address. Based on that, they created a circular procurement guidance. They also started creating tools. So they created a multi-criteria decision-making tool that included whole of life costing. They assess the local market to identify which suppliers were ready and which suppliers were not ready in order to start investing in the local economy. And they started sharing all this information with other councils and with other stakeholders to start celebrating those regional wins. The other case study is similar. It's from the Eastern Alliance for Greenhouse Action, EGA, and they wanted to be more specific, so they didn't have a whole framework. They wanted to understand the existing barriers of using reusable and recycled materials in construction. So their objective was to increase the volume of reused materials and minimize the landfill diversion, and they wanted to build capacity and procurement projects design. They wanted to build capacity for the procurement project and design teams. How they did it? Well, they started embedding behavioral change analysis at the start of the project to address barriers and challenges. So they realized that, well, all of these people, all of our teams, they already have a way of doing it. If we want to start changing this, we have to use behavioral change. So they engage behavioral change professionals to start putting that into the whole project. They identified the biggest leverage that they had, which was the policies that each council had, and started basing that in order to change the behaviors. They created tools. They created a life cycle-based decision-making tool, which evaluated the impact throughout the value chain of the 5 top most used materials, and they recommended other options for procurement professionals of what materials they could use instead of the most polluting ones. With that, so thank you for everyone that's been answering this slide. So these are some examples that all the people here are doing. I won't read them all, but we will send all the answers when we send it back. But a lot of companies are doing asphalt and including recycle asphalt. They're developing tools and support. So I think it's very interesting what everyone's doing. And just to I think the key takeaway is that everyone here is doing something. You have to leverage that opportunity, collaborate, understand what they're doing, their barriers, their successes, and grab all that knowledge and bring it to your own council. Having said that, I am going to give back the mic to Nicole and the panel discussion.
Thank you, Seb, and thank you everybody for participating in the Slido. There is a lot happening, as we can see, and I think really good to see the communication across councils come through there around consistent terminology, and some research as well around circular procurement products, which, as in the chat, someone had added in there, Anya had mentioned, can we share the information that we have on products? Absolutely. This is so important. The collaboration and the partnership, and local government is primed to be able to do this. So we may be able to hear from Caitlin, who could actually speak to the GISA and the website that you have created. Caitlin, let's go to the panel and hear from you. What have you been working on at GISA?
Yeah, so hi everyone, very excited to be on this panel and talking about circular procurement and with other people who also want to talk about circular procurement. So yeah, Green Industries SA, we recently launched our Circular Procurement Knowledge Hub back in August, which is, as Nicole said at the start, a knowledge and information sharing platform for all things circular procurement. Yeah, I'll give a brief overview of what's in it now. We've got 5 key areas of that. We've got tools, policies and guidelines, which has some of the state and federal government policies, but also some more general ones which would really be applicable for local government. We've got one developed by the Institute of Public Works Engineers Australasia in collaboration with the Local Government Association of SA, and that's about using recycled material in infrastructure assets, and it goes so in depth. It's a really invaluable resource that we're very excited to have helped develop and host on the website. We've got several other tools that can help. We've also got a page of circular procurement in action, which is featuring some case studies of how people have put this into practice across a range of environments. We've got industry, we've got state government applications, large businesses, small cafes, a huge range. And then we've also got some videos hearing from people with experience in circular procurement and how they've put that into practice. We've actually got Phil, who's also on the panel, on a video. We've also got a circular products register, which is listing a variety of products with circular properties. So a lot of them are recycled content products, and this is, as recycled content levels can vary in products, especially large batch, for example, road base. It's always important to do your due diligence, but this is, we've done that initial vetting of these are the ones that are available for people to look at. And that's one we're really hoping to continue to grow over time as we become more aware of products, as more products come on the market. And then probably the last really useful thing for local governments is we've got education and training. So we run a Circular Procurement 101 masterclass for state government, but it's got a whole lot of learnings in there that'll be applicable in any environment. And then the training, there's a training module that accompanies the recycled content infrastructure assets that I mentioned earlier that I think will be super valuable, and that actually provides a micro accreditation.
Amazing. Thank you, Caitlin. There's so many resources in there that I think is going to be valuable to the audience, and great to hear that you've also got the directory in there where you're having products, which directly answers Anya's question there. And we also love, as procurement professionals, to hear anyone mention the word due diligence. So that's exciting. Happy to pass over to Ali now to hear about what you've been doing at Waverley.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, loud and clear.
So I am one of the sustainability engagement officers at Waverley Council, and since 2017 I have been really lucky to lead the development and implementation of the internal sustainability and now circular economy program, which targets 5 key areas. One of them is procurement, the other one is leadership, events, the resilience, and then the design, construction, maintenance and end of life of assets. And I guess in terms of circular procurement, It all started when we were working with different teams trying to develop this program. And no matter how far away we wanted to get from procurement, no offense to the procurement professionals here today, we just realized that it's all intertwined. So procurement for us was like one of the central points that should be looked into each one of those sort of categories that the project targets, the program targets. But it came like as a light bulb, because we were like, oh, so procurement goes beyond just decision making around the purchasing or transaction in between parties. It's actually a really good opportunity, but also really tangible tool to advance the circular economy within the organization. And there's a lot of things happening in this space at Waverley, and one of the ones that I'm really excited about is that we have included circular economy and sustainability KPIs, including circular procurement KPIs, into the scorecards of our general manager, directors, and EMs. All the things that we have been working on is just like, embedding circular procurement into our current tools, like the procurement policy, procedure, RFTs, and all the other tools that we need to do and go through the framework of procurement, also working on things like the public domain technical manual and the building design specs, so that we include in there like products that are related to circular procurement. But also something really exciting that has been happening in this space at Waverley is because this is a change management program, is to see the change in culture. So from having those people and teams that, we're really hard to bring on board the journey, to just coming to us just going, hey, this is what we're doing in terms of circular procurement in this space, or this is what we're trying to explore. So yeah, I think that's sort of like a very brief summary of what's been happening in this space at Waverley.
Thank you. I think to hear that you're seeing that culture change is so reassuring to many people, because that that is the long game that needs to happen in any organization, not just local government. And I know you've been working on this for some time, so yeah, fantastic that you're actually seeing that come to fruition. Scott, you've also been working on this for quite a while. What have you been doing at Bendigo, and what are some of your highlights?
Apart from agreeing absolutely with everything Ali just covered in terms of seeing that sort of embedding and getting this culture of a large organisation like a council, depending on the council, I appreciate, comfortable with that. I guess for us, we've sort of looked at circular procurement through a couple of lenses. One has been on that organisational perspective in terms of year-on-year spending $100, $200 million on products and services. So trying to bed circular thinking into that process in terms of how do we work with our regional suppliers, especially as a regional council where we don't necessarily have as big access to suppliers. So how do we effectively state our intent over the coming years and then sit down with suppliers and say, how do we work with you to get more circular products into your offerings for our products and services? So I guess that's how we went forward from our circular procurement policy that we look to embed in-house. And I guess just as a slight addition to that circular procurement piece that potentially touches on some non-procurement people on the call today, I guess we've also been looking at it through our, I don't like to use the term waste, but lots of teams have lots of councils have a waste team or a resource recovery team. So looking at it through that lens in terms of how do we use the challenges we have on the resource recovery side of things in terms of the money we're spending to look after wasted materials on behalf of residents and businesses. How do we engage with the market and work with them to get better outcomes in terms of Bendigo has a landfill that's closing. We went out to market, and whilst there weren't a lot of mature solutions out there yet, sitting down with existing market players or those looking to come into the market, we're able to, I guess, start to get some local solutions set up to try and do something interesting with some of those materials, like soft plastics, to handle the soft plastics for us to then buy it back. So dealing with a waste issue as well as an infrastructure procurement piece, and sort of trying to close that circle a little bit. So lots of opportunities to look at it through a few different lenses.
Thank you. And just, the multifaceted elements of sustainability. You're looking at one problem, but it touches on so many others. And really nice to hear how you are sitting down with suppliers and signaling, super important in terms of procurement, letting the market have the time to come and meet you at where your commitments and targets are as well. So definitely want to hear more about that, Scott. Over to Philip, another busy man. Please give us a rundown on what you've been doing and some of your highlights.
Great, thanks, Nicole. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge I'm on Kaurna land. Next, I'd just like to talk a little bit about why we're interested in circular procurement. I think there are a couple of reasons. Firstly, for environmental reasons, we're saving resources and reducing greenhouse gas emissions by being involved in this space. But there's also a bit of self-interest. So curbside recycling services that council provides they've moved from being an income generator just a few years ago to being quite a significant cost. So we want to create demand for recycled materials. We want to signal to manufacturers that we want more recycled materials, and that increasing demand will increase the value of those recycled materials, which then comes back to us because it offsets the cost of the materials recovery that happens with our curbside recycling. So there's a bit of self-interest there in circular procurement as well. So City of Burnside joined the Buying It Back pilot project. It was with the Local Government Association of South Australia. There were 9 councils involved, mostly metro, but also some regional. We had support from Green Industries SA, and the councils through the project all committed to prioritising recycled content through the procurement process. We all committed to track our recycled content, how much we were purchasing, and we also all committed to reporting on the tons of recycled materials we're purchasing. Importantly, they were the commitments we officially made through the project, but importantly, the group that came together was also really good at sharing knowledge about products and processes. We shared resources for education within our organisations, and we supported each other through those processes. We focused on some key products, office stationery fixtures like bollards, fencing, decking, playgrounds, bins, road and construction materials. These are big because a lot of tons involved there, like asphalt and compost. And we all introduced a mechanism, and the mechanism was that tender evaluations of key products now have a minimum of 20% of the non-financial score directed to recycled content. So 20% of the non-financial score directed to recycled content for those products we were focusing on. And that makes a big difference as we move through tender processes. We start getting more recycled content coming through just because of that mechanism involved. And we more than doubled our recycled content in the first year, moving asphalt from 10% to 30% RAP or recycled asphalt, and including crushed glass. We increased recycled sand from 60 to 250 tonnes. We increased the amount of plastic we were putting in projects, and we increased the amount of paper that we were buying with a new contract as well, the amount of recycled paper. So importantly, with the paper and asphalt, that was through new contracts that came through in the tender processes. So all of those things have worked together to really improve how we're working in this circular space.
Amazing. Thank you, Philip. High achiever there. Yeah, there's so much that you've just spoken about. Within that, I think we saw sharing, how important that is. And it's definitely, if we look at the 2 case studies that we provided from Edge, that was, the best part about those projects was because there were multiple councils coming together, sharing resources and sharing those learnings. The other in there is measurement. So, and using the procurement process to be able to get that measurement and those metrics for you as well. That's a really strong, having that metric in there in terms of the tender evaluation. 20% is huge. So love to hear more about that. And I think on those, having like KPIs for suppliers, if we could come back to Ali and maybe talk about what helped you succeed. I know we've seen in the chat there's people interested in those KPIs and having them at the director scorecard level. And I know when I saw that's something you were doing, that was the first thing that grabbed my eye as well. That can be hard to do. So maybe can you talk to us a little bit about how that initiative succeeded? What was it about that? Was that part of the culture change? And what some of the outcomes that you've seen as a result as well?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to share them. I'll have to check with my manager, but I'm pretty good at sharing information. So at some stage, I'll send them to you. I guess like it's we also say this when we talk about the program. It's really important to see it as a medium to long-term change management program. So it's not going to happen overnight. For us, it took about 4 goes to get them across the line. But I think one of the most important things is we actually have an executive leadership team that is really committed and is really supportive. So we, to the point that we had some of them just coming back to us, just going like, I don't think what you're proposing is enough. I think like you need to really like, you know, put it up, which was great. But the important thing is that when we presented the program to them, sustainability, environment was sort of like at the back of the queue. It was all about leadership, all about this is happening in Europe, like we're really lagging behind here in Australia. Can we just like try to move things forward? It's also because it's a part of an overall program. So there's like changes that are happening in so many different areas. And it's just about like bringing accountability into the table. There is a reporting framework that they have to report back to staff on what they have been doing and why it's happening or why it's not. So I'll walk you through some of these examples in a second. But in terms of like why it's succeeding, you need patience. You need a lot of patience to make it happen, not giving up, the supportive executive team, but also just using that spirit of collaboration. So when we decided to try to give the KPIs a go, we worked really closely with the teams of, you know, that these directors and executive managers manage, but also really closely with them. So that was the way of getting it across the line, but also start with small KPIs, because like we were like, you know, giving them to some of them like these really high level KPIs and like, you know, that were very idealistic, and they were like, oh, I don't even know if I have the knowledge to be able to make that happen. But like some of the examples that are directly related to circular procurement is that the Director of Corporate Services, which is the one where procurement follows under, she has to make sure, obviously, that circular economy isn't incorporated in procurement tools, but also that staff are following these tools. And in the review of the asset disposal and policy and procedures, she has to make sure that that includes circular economy, not only as a principle in the policy, but that is also like applied throughout the different processes. Then for our procurement manager, he has to oversee the development and implementation of a mandatory procurement module in which we have embedded circular economy. So what we're trying to do is not to have separate strategies or policies, because we have found that for Waverley, having it as the part of the thing that you do at day to day is the one that works for us the most. But in saying that, so those are the ones that are more specific to circular procurement. What we have found is like the majority of our EMs and directors have a circular economy KPI in them, and they're all intertwined and interlinked to circular procurement. So them delivering on that, they will help deliver the circular procurement KPIs as well. I hope that makes sense.
Complete sense. Yeah, especially the, you know, breaking it down small, doing collaboration, and that as sustainability professionals, I think everybody can relate to that. You know, if you need to get something across the line, you need to do it together. Start small, bite-sized pieces. But also good to hear that directors are asking you to up the game as well. I think that's something we can all aspire to.
Yeah. I think the one thing that I forgot to mention is that by reporting back to staff, you're actually making it pretty obvious that the organization is doing something about it, but it also encourages staff to just go and, you know, talk about these things and try to incorporate circular procurement and circular economy into their work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head there where you talked about embedding it. So this isn't standalone, it's embedding it into those existing processes. It's the everyday. This is something we talk about and we do. It's not this thing that we have to add on at the end of a procurement process. If you go back to Scott, you talked about how you've started to do the similar thing, embedding circularity into that process. So could you talk to us about some of those wins for Greater Bendigo how you've been able to embed into the process, and is there anything that you would do differently?
I guess just to start with the slightly less positive in terms of doing differently, I think, or never assume that even though something's signed off by an executive management team and people are committed, that things are necessarily going to turn out the way you planned in terms of trying to get even tougher KPIs, as I think lots of people are happy to sign up for. Right, we've got specific percentages of how are our requests for quotes and requests for tenders complying with actually requiring a response from suppliers that is a circular solution of some form or a reason why they're not able to supply it. The challenge there is then trying to keep on top of the hundreds of quotes and tenders that go out and I guess make sure that people are complying. So I think just keeping aware of, or being even more aware of the amount of resourcing or how to best watch over that compliance. And I would totally agree that having director level buy-in certainly helps. I think for what's worked for us beyond that, really engaging with suppliers, is probably leveraging the fact that sustainability is a really large topic at the City of Greater Bendigo, and actually trying to have a meaningful impact on carbon emissions long term, as well as other environmental impacts, but also the typical day-to-day resource management, waste management side of things has been a challenge. So really trying to, I guess, put those both to the fore in terms of selling, or why should we try and make circular procurement a business as usual and a mandatory requirement that we need our teams to put into their design specifications and quotes, but also that we expect our suppliers to respond to, even if they don't necessarily have all the solutions now. And what I mean by that in terms of getting that buy-in is, on the waste side of things, is using our circular procurement as a mechanism to try and find homes for a lot of the wasted materials that the local council is currently managing, and oftentimes either has to get sent out of the region to be handled, or ends up in a hole in the ground at the moment. And so really starting to drive those wins, similar to what Philip mentioned, in terms of there's a lot of stuff you can put into infrastructure. It's not perfectly circular, but it's certainly better than a lot of the alternatives that happen to some of those waste materials at the moment. And I guess on that sustainability point, just for those councils that I guess have their heads more around sustainability than the circular economy, once you take electricity out of a local council emissions mix, which I guess a lot of councils have jumped onto renewable energy power purchase agreements, what you're typically left with is fuel use and gas. But the elephant in the room that a lot of people aren't looking at is then those scope 3 emissions, so embodied carbon in all the stuff we're buying and the services we're procuring in. And I guess City Greater Bendigo is a bit of a snapshot looked at what does that impact look like for our sustainability strategy, and yet another bit of a stick and lever for even why this is so important is looking at our spend each year. The greenhouse gas emissions, we used to work with an organisation called Planet Price based up in Brisbane, and plugging in our dollar spend each year for procurement categories is roughly 5.5 times the rest of our scope 1 and 2 emissions combined. Now that's not including electricity, because we're procuring renewable energy, but we're effectively 35,000 tonnes of carbon equivalent for our purchases versus fuel and gas combined. And so that then has started us also on a journey of looking at, when you're looking at that recycled content, also then starting that slightly longer term conversation of bringing in the life cycle impact point of, well, okay, is this recycled content better? I noticed someone in the chat mentioned if you're lugging recycled content solutions around either the state or interstate or internationally, you then start to have some of those confronting conversations of, do we want something more circular but it's a higher emission? And so that's probably another thing that we've thrown into the mix, just to confuse, but also just to add a bit more pressure on accountability.
Thank you. I'm really glad that you raised that co-benefit there of scope 3 and embodied emissions that we're addressing at the same time in circular procurement. All the time, it's very, as you say, we don't want to overwhelm people or the process or suppliers you know, internally or externally, but it's just such a clear co-benefit. So I'm very thankful that you erased that. It's a super important one. If we can go over to Philip now and hear a bit more about how you embedded circularity into procurement, but also some of those lessons learned as well, because I think this is what people are really interested to hear. So especially around, you talked about that supplier education engagement piece and evaluation, how you decided on best practice during that decision making for that 20%. You could speak to a couple of lessons learned there, that'd be great.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Nicole. Well, backing up what people have already said, I think at Burnside there were some key steps in embedding circular procurement. The first one was the LGA project and working with other councils. That support was invaluable. So I think that the teamwork is really important. We updated our policy that explains circular procurement, but also teased that out from other environmental and social types of procurement. So teasing that out is important. And we updated our processes. So our acquisition plans and our templates all have circular procurement built in, and incorporated that mechanism I talked about with the 20% non-financial weighting. And supporting teams through the process is really important. Ali mentioned the importance of executive support, and that is really key. And then I've been on so many more procurement processes than I thought I ever would be as the environmental sustainability guy. I've learned a lot more about asphalt than I thought I would ever know. So it's really important to provide that support. So we've done sort of education sessions and work sat on through procurement processes with different teams. What have we learned? Supplier education is really important. So simple things like what is recycled versus recyclable. That's where some of the suppliers are at. Working with the suppliers on their tenders when they're putting in tenders. We had some responses coming back for one piece of equipment, for example, and the supplier said, "Oh, we use recycled paper in our office." So we had to go back and say, no, we're actually after recycled content in whatever we're buying from you. It's great you're using recycled paper, but give us some information about the product we're buying. And we've also spent a lot of time working with suppliers around the difficulties capturing the quantities of recycled content. I've spent time going back through invoices, and that sucks. So building into tender processes and contracts that suppliers need to report on the quantities makes life a lot easier. But that does take time. As others have mentioned, these processes take time. And best practice is something you also asked about, Nicole. Awareness of products is really important. What are the products that are available out there? Getting things early in the design phase rather than when you're actually going out to buy materials. So make sure it's been designed to allow for recycled materials. And what do we want? What recycled materials do we want in the stuff that we're buying? Asphalt's a great example. So I had to read up and do a lot of research on asphalt when we came to our tender. We decided that we wanted to massively increase the amount of recycled asphalt we were using, and we wanted to incorporate crushed glass because crushed glass is a particular interest to us. It's a byproduct of the curbside recycling, but we decided not to go with soft plastics and crumb rubber in our asphalt. So that's a decision sort of process that we had to go through. And lastly, it's all about the journey, and it's an ongoing journey. And that's really important. So now we're working on how do we capture those materials that are being purchased by contractors, not directly by council, and how do we improve our reporting? There's still unquantified recycled materials used in our playgrounds, for example. Yes, we use recycled materials, but how much, we're not sure. Or variable volumes. Suppliers tell us they've got between 10 and 50% recycled content, but that's difficult to report on. So it's an ongoing journey, and as we continue to monitor and build on our work, we continue to improve.
Yeah, I think this is something we can all take from this webinar. Progress over perfection. No one has nailed this yet. It's early days for councils as well as suppliers. Love that they're letting you know that they have recycled content in their paper. That's excellent. but yeah, just demonstrating that there is a little bit to go, but also that how important that procurement signaling is as well, and getting things out to market early and giving a chance for suppliers to respond. So we are fast running out of time as expected, and we do have a lot of questions coming through in the chat. So I'm going to start going through some of these. Caitlin, we had one in there for you, and I did want to ask you more about the Knowledge Hub. So how local governments can use them, and also what's the content that you're looking at in the future? How will you, involve local governments and allow them to participate? And as Ali has asked in the chat, on the list of products, how do you plan to maintain that? Obviously, that's going to be a challenge as well. If you could speak to that one.
Yeah, no, very good question. So yeah, the Knowledge Hub is definitely a living website. There's constantly new tools, new information coming out around circular procurement as more people get more involved. So we're definitely looking to grow, the tools, the guidelines, the case studies in particular. One area we're really interested to add is field trials of products, and I know a lot of councils have field trialed particularly recycled content in roads. So we have some information there already, some life cycle analysis of crushed glass, crumb rubber, and recycled plastic in roads, which I think would be really interesting to councils. But yeah, we're looking for any other field trials that people are doing, products they've had success with. But also, if you've got tools you've developed that you want to share, the Knowledge Hub can be a platform to share that widely. If that's something. So we're always open to share anything. In terms of maintaining the product register, I mean, there's obvious challenges with that because companies are constantly changing what products they have, hosting new ones, which is one of the big reasons we recommend people doing their due diligence and including questions around the certifications and levels of recycled content in those tender evaluations, because that will have the most up-to-date information, and accurate information will come from the suppliers in those direct discussions and those tender documents. And in terms of keeping it updated, that's something we're thinking about and working on how to do with some state government agencies in terms of internal registers. It's not just learning about what products are available, but it's also including information about what's actually worked really well in practice. What have people used and been really happy with the performance of? That's information that's valuable to have as well. So really, it's just for us keeping into those networks of how people are using the products. But it's definitely something we're continuing to work on, because having that reliable list of products is really useful.
Thank you. Again, progress over perfection. So keep at it. Were you going to add something there at the end?
I just saw someone had asked for a link to the Knowledge Hub, so I've just popped that in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you. So we did have a question from Marlon, which is around the funding mechanisms that are available to finance circular procurement initiatives, resources and products. So there's definitely grant funding coming through across states, I believe. But perhaps Ali, you could speak to that as well, and how you have incorporated KPIs or metrics into the budgeting process. That might help answer that question.
Yeah, sure. I think a tangible example in here is the assets and operations director has as a KPI that they need to incorporate circular economy into the project management system, but also they need to budget for it in the 2025 to 2026 financial year. And in here, it goes back to it all being interlinked. So at the moment, we are working with the project managers and asset teams to make sure that they start identifying through the use of a set of metrics and checklists that start identifying circular economy initiatives that can be incorporated as part of a specific program, so that they think about it really well in advance. Then we go into costing them, and then we partner with those teams to try to figure out, okay, well, how can we get state grants, or how can we explore grants that councils don't usually go for? Like one of the projects that the project managers worked on that had a lot of like recycled glass and recycled products in place, they applied for a grant that councils don't usually apply, and they did get a lot of funding. So going back to it, it's just having those KPIs in place, it sort of like forces teams to really go beyond the usual sort of like grants and thinking about things really well in advance, so that they can go back and say, well, this is going to cost you a 30% extra, but if you compare the benefits in the sort of like long term, is actually not going to cost you that much. But if you come to the game just when you're about to go into the procurement, it does get pretty hard, because in there you've already gone through like council's approvals and whatever you want to do. So you really need to start when you're about, like the first thing that we ask through these metrics is like, do you really need to deliver on this project? And is what you're proposing the best way of doing it? If not, you need to go back to the drawing table. And from there, you go like, okay, these are all of the circular economy things that I can do. This is how much it's going to cost me. Let's go and get the funding through council, but obviously also support it through external funding, so that you can go like, it's like it's like applying for a funding that they need, like, you know, different sources of funding coming to the table, make things a lot easier.
Love it. This is like best practice project planning, really, and the key there is getting it up front. So this is exceptional experience that you're sharing with everybody. You've set the bar for sure. Philip, you've got your hand up there. Did you want to contribute to that question as well?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think it's also important to be aware that products with recycled content aren't always more expensive. So we found, for example, recycled asphalt to be cheaper than virgin asphalt in some of our work. So don't go in with that assumption, but it can save you money in other ways as well. So that life cycle analysis of how the longevity of the product, but also if you are moving towards zero emissions, then you may need to offset emissions from products, and recycled content may also save you money there because it's lower embedded emissions. So don't always assume it's more expensive, and look at other ways it might save you money.
Brilliant. Again, the co-benefits there. Thank you, Philip. I know that we had cost up as one of the barriers, but absolutely that's changing all the time as the market is coming up to speed, and where it's saving, it's saving suppliers money as well if it's helping them be more resource efficient. So thanks for raising that. Scott, you want to add to that as well? Go for it.
Just to Philip's point, I think there's also the waste management cost side of things, in terms of if you're able to find suppliers that can link in with your own management of those materials, you can potentially reduce the cost on that. So obviously it's seen as more expensive on an infrastructure side of things, but the whole of life cost of that material to council could potentially be lower. We found that in a couple of instances. I guess the only other point I'd flag, and just on Philip's point on recycled asphalt product wrap as an example, I guess that's that key point of really signalling intentions to local suppliers, especially if you're not in a big metropolitan area. Of lots of those products are very well used in the industry already. So if you're not signalling those intents, we often find we're getting to the limits of what products actually available, because that market isn't as instant. It's snapped up. So I take glass, sand, because no one wants to send it to Melbourne because it's heavy, to the only beneficiation plant there. So I guess for keeping that in mind as procurement groups as well, in terms of you've got your infrastructure delivery plans. So if you're able to signal those intents to your contract panels, they can also get ready, so you're not left in a crunch going, oh, well, we can't deliver this project with as much recycled content because it's just not there for the timing.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, supplier communication, absolutely. Signaling in advance, and you don't really know until you ask. Sometimes you don't know what's out there. So as you say, there's new products coming online all the time, and value. So I think one of the key points you made there is this is not just about dollar value. There's so much more value within procurement, environmental and social value. And so it's important to look at that whole life cycle. Absolutely. Help us to get it over the line. Philip, is that another hand up, or is that the same one? Do you want to jump in?
Sorry, same hand. I'll take it down.
No worries. We'll go to the last question that's come through here. If anyone wants to jump in the panel, can anyone comment on how they're reporting on emission reduction and landfill diversion outcomes of the circular economy initiatives, for example, through carbon reporting or as a separate initiative in annual reports? So the question here is anyone doing that yet? Are you being able to report on emission reductions as part of some of these circular economy initiatives? Have you been able to measure and report on it? To jump in?
We haven't.
Yeah.
We're actually trying to give it a go, and at the moment what we're planning to use is the material passport called Madasta, but also incorporating specific metrics into this checklist for the project managers and the asset managers, which is the main area that we are concentrating on at the moment. But the fact that we don't, Madasta is more like Europe type of tool that we haven't been able to find like in Australia, sort of like a certification or a specific tool that allows us to measure this. So I guess like if we don't have that in here, it's just worthwhile having a look externally at what is available until we find something like that. But yeah, we're doing our best with these like small metrics, which I'm happy to share later on, if that makes
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I think it's completely a learning process here. There isn't really the catch-all metric that, it's so different for every procurement, so different for every supplier. So it's definitely a work in progress. Scott, did you want to add to that one too?
Yeah, I'd say it probably also depends on the data you have at hand. So if you just have your procurement spend data, then there are probably a few solutions floating about. I mentioned Planet Price earlier that you can plug into to give you a bit of a snapshot. It becomes a bit trickier then when you're talking about local recycled content suppliers and what that impact is. You can do that on a project by project level, but if you're just plugging in your spend each year, it requires a bit more work. I think if where we're going, and it sounds like others are going as well, and some already are, in terms of that material quantities, annual materials inventory, I think there are a lot of tools out there like Trellis as an example. I think South Australian based organisation that's used a lot for carbon accounting and reporting. You can theoretically then plug in your materials use, and then you've effectively got LCA intensity metrics there in terms of the different types of materials that you can start to, I guess, do that. The problem there being you really need to have some decent data there. But in the first instance, you can, I guess, there are tools out there to put the spend in, and then hopefully over time you can transition to the actual physical quantities side of things for decision making and reporting.
Yeah, thank you. So that's around, we can get metrics and measures at a category or spend level, and then as you start to embed bit by bit circularity into procurement and tenders, that's where we can start to get some of those more granular metrics. And again, saying that it's important to get it into the procurement process because that's where it becomes part of the contract, and you can request that information from suppliers and let them know up front the information that you want to collect as well. Yeah, fast running out of time, unfortunately. I'm just looking at the chat. There's a lot of questions in there that we can answer, I think, when we wrap up the webinar in the follow-up email. There's one around using SDGs. Has anybody on the panel used metrics that align with the UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals? No. No, that's not something we've seen done with local government yet as well, but at Edge we have worked with clients on aligning metrics and sustainability objectives with UN SDGs, so it's definitely possible.
Can I say something about that, Nicole?
Yeah.
We sort of explored doing that, but then we realized that in a kind of way, it takes us in the reporting framework away of our own targets. And it does get a little bit confusing for people within the organizations, like what are we actually reporting on and what is the purpose of this data? So for us, the program is about delivering on what we are trying to achieve internally, and we've just decided not to add that extra level of complexity to the game.
That makes sense. Keeping it simple, and perhaps a better approach is to align organizational strategic targets with SDGs rather than, as you say, trying to overcomplicate things and map, tender environmental objectives to SDGs as well. That's a really good point. Thank you. We're nearing the end and we are running out of questions, but there is one that I did have for Philip as we near the end here. Philip, I hear that you may have a circular procurement joke that you'd like to share.
So, yeah, engaging staff's really important in these processes and in staff presentations. I often find a bit of humour is helpful. So I've come up with a circular procurement joke. I'm not sure if there are others floating around out there. I'd love to hear them if there are. My joke is, why is it dangerous to go drinking with a group of circular procurement experts? Why is it dangerous to go drinking with a group of circular procurement experts? It's dangerous because they're always so keen on the next round.
Boom, boom.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad I included that in this sort of question. That is a wonderfully light note to start to wrap up to. And yeah, I'd love to hear your circular procurement or economy jokes. Please send them through. We'll include them in the webinar wrap-up email for a bit of light humor. Do you happen to be a father, Phil?
You got me. Yes.
Yeah, that is, gold standard dad joke right there. As we run out of time here, I'd really like to end on some of the positive takeaways and the practical actions, because that's what this webinar has been all about. In what can our webinar attendees do within your council? What can they get inspiration from and take away some practical next steps? So could we go around the room, maybe starting with Caitlin, and what would be your top 1 or 2 tips for the audience to get started in circular procurement?
I think I'd probably say is look for the easy wins, the ones where the materials are out there, and reach out and ask for help. There's as William said, there's so many resources out there. There's people who've been trying it in so many local governments who are happy to share their resources. There's the Knowledge Hub. That just you're not alone in doing it, and ask for those resources because that'll make it so much easier to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, ask, start the conversation, start talking to your peers and others in local governments. All got kind of rocks and groups of council. So do it together. Always easiest when done together. Thank you, Caitlin. And Ali, do you have a top tip or a top takeaway for us?
I think just really take the time to go to team meetings. So we went to 27 team meetings to get the conversation started. That will get people, sort of like get the idea that there is this circular economy concept in there, and just really make sure to collaborate with other teams rather than just going and imposing a list of things to do. Just create things in partnership. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Sustainability professionals, we've got to do that together collaboratively. And good top tip there in terms of going with the short list rather than the long list and imposing it on. Absolutely. Okay, Scott, do you have anything you'd like to wrap up with? Some tips of gold?
Aside from if you can get yourself a giant stick, I'd highly recommend it. But in the absence of that, I think there's something to be said for, reiterate what everyone else has said, but if you can get things in there that are part of business as usual, as just mandatory expectations and not optional, and looking at it across the organisation, circular procurement isn't just for buying stuff; it's also about sustainability and resource recovery angle. And I think the more of those voices you get on board, the stronger it is, because it's not just you from a procurement perspective saying, let's do this. It's reaching into all those other objectives as well.
Yeah, thank you. Everybody has the role to play. This is across the organisation, and I think that's been one of the strongest points we've had, is like if you can get it at the higher level as well and get that support top down that is in your favour. Thank you, Scott. And last but not least, Phil.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. I agree with everything that everyone else has said in these top tips. And I'd add that it's a journey. And I think I'm echoing what people have said throughout. It's a journey. I think it's really important to get on the front foot with suppliers, with things like pre-tender briefings, information in tender documents. And I'd recommend embedding quarterly reporting in contracts so that you can monitor what's going on, you can understand what's going on, and you can improve what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. Like the ongoing performance management, but also just dialogue with suppliers as the contract goes on. Super, super valuable. And journey. We are all in this journey together. We probably still at the very beginning. So yeah, we really hope that this webinar has given you a lot of food for thought, some inspiration. I feel like I've learned a lot. We've all got such rich experiences to share here. So I want to thank the panel, thank all of you on the panel and the Edge team as well for taking the time out, volunteering this time to share with everybody on the webinar. Yeah, blown away by the work that you're doing. It's exceptional. So thank you very much. We've had lots of thank yous come through in the chat as well, and requests for more information. So we absolutely will. We'll put together a bit of a follow-up pack, which has the slides and the recording, Phil's joke, any other jokes that come through, and some links and resources as well. But thanks everybody for being a really engaged audience, for everybody's time. Go forth, be circular, and look forward to seeing you the next time. Thanks, everyone.